Hello and welcome back to our Legend of Heroes Trails in the Sky 1 playthrough. In our last episode we basically did a lot of busy work. We went to Leiston Fortress, discovered that the Royal Army was not necessarily lying to us but not necessarily telling the truth at the same time, because they have Professor Russell inside their fortress. We're going to try to sneak into said fortress, smuggled amongst the cargo from the Orbment factory, and we have Tita along with us to use Professor Russell's scanner jammer. So yeah, let's go rescue Grandy. Gerald says, "Hey, wow, you guys look busy. We've just been ordered to get a factory ship in the air. It's a madhouse." Bartholomew says, "The factory ship's being sent out of port. I know they're supposed to go to Leiston, but flying out ahead of schedule. I wonder if something's happened out there." Factory Chief Murdoch says, "I've been waiting for you. Is everybody ready?" Agate says, "Yeah, we can go at any time." Tita says, "Is the lead ready too?" Factory Chief Murdoch says, "Yeah, you were lucky that last-minute military order came through like that. We were just about to head out to Leiston Fortress. We can take off any time." Estelle asks, "Any time? Won't it be hard to leave without, the ship?" Joshua says, "Estelle, look down." Estelle says, "Oh, do we have to jump?" Tita laughs, "No, we don't." Estelle says, "What? What the?" Joshua asks, "What's happening to the flight deck?" Agate asks, "What, didn't you know? This place has got enough secrets built into it to blow your mind." Estelle says, "To be honest, Agate, what about that?" "It has a lift that goes horizontally and vertically." Estelle frowns. "I don't know how much more mind I have left to blow." Joshua grins. "You probably have more left than I do, Estelle." Factory Chief Murdoch asks, "And all of this, it's all..." Estelle says, "I know, it's all Professor Russell's handiwork, right? Tita, your grandfather is something else." Tita laughs. "I couldn't agree more." Maintenance Chief Gustav says, "Thanks for waiting, guys." Tita says, "Sir." Maintenance Chief Gustav says, "Howdy, Tita. I already heard everything from Murdoch. Hard to believe what happened to the professor. Guess it's up to us to help him out of it." Tita says, "Thank you." Agate says, "Yeah, we owe you." Maintenance Chief Gustav says, "Not at all. I'm the one who owes Professor Russell." "Okie dokie, we're ready. Are we ready to lift off?" Lift off we go. Maintenance Chief Gustav says, "Alright, let's load up. We're off to Leiston Fortress." Factory Chief Murdoch says, "Please bring Professor Russell back safely home. And take care of Tita." Tita blushes. "Sir?" Estelle says, "No sweat." Joshua says, "Let's go then." Factory Chief Murdoch says, I'll be counting on you, Braces. Dorothy cries, hey, wait! Dorothy is very much out of breath. Oh, head rush. Factory Chief Murdoch asks, Dorothy? Dorothy says, oh, Chief, we're Estelle and crew aboard that last ship. Factory Chief Murdoch says, that's right. How did you know? Dorothy says, the guild tipped me, and there's big trouble brewing if what my editors told me rings true. I wanted to let them know before they left. Factory Chief Murdoch asks, what kind of trouble? I shudder to think how much worse the situation can get. Dorothy says, well, this is totally off the record, but it seems some members of the Royal Guardsmen in Gronsel were just arrested for treason. Factory Chief Murdoch cries, what? Maintenance Chief Gustav says, this is the container where you'll all be hiding. All of your real close friends. It's going to be a tight squeeze for 4 people. Estelle says, really? It looks big enough. Maintenance Chief Gustav says, it's only half as big inside as it looks. Gotta have cargo in there for camouflage's sake. He laughs. Think of yourselves like the filling for a donut. Estelle says, that's not encouraging. Joshua says, we'll be fine. It's all a matter of how you approach the situation. Agate says, it'll get the job done, but I wouldn't want to take a vacation in there. Alright. Say man, you got any augment facilities here or anything? I'm a little off kilter, so I want to change things up. Maintenance Chief Gustav says, we have an onboard factory of sorts. You're welcome to make use of it. Tita says, I'll go too. My augment could use a little tune-up after all it's been through. This way, Agate. Agate says, alright, and follows Tita away. Maintenance Chief Gustav says, Leiston Fortress is a 30-minute flight from here. It won't be too comfortable in that container, so you ought to get some rest while you can. Estelle says, sure thing. Joshua says, thank you. Faye says, Professor Russell abducted by the Royal Army. This changes so many things. If they notice the container's fake, it'll ruin the rescue and expose our troops. I have got to concentrate. Yes, you do that, Faye. Igor says, Riemann, we're being swept north-northeast. You son of a... Hurry up and get us back on course. Every minute you play around is putting Professor Russell in greater danger. Riemann says, oh, shut it, old-timer. I can't concentrate with you barking in my ear like that. A very professional pilot there. Antoine says, I am the Nyan cat. Wilmont says, and now he's gone. Factory Chief is not telling us any sooner. The Factory Chief not telling us sooner didn't help either. Show a little trust. Tita says, very well then, let's see your combat augment. I'll just run a quick diagnostic on it. Agate says, this isn't... But, wow, you just light all up around some new gadget. And that's a complete new thing. We can't do anything here. Alright, we may as well go and tell the maintenance chief to crate us up. Maintenance Chief Gustav asks, something wrong? Flight to Leicester Fortress should take about 30 minutes. Got to get the container ready for you guys. You'd best go and enjoy moving while you can. Yes, you've already said that. Estelle says, wow, look how high up we are. It's been a really long time since I was on an airship. Joshua says, no kidding. We didn't exactly have time to go sightseeing on the Sky Pirate ship. Not that this even really compares. We're in an exponentially more dangerous situation now than we were at that point. We need to stay alert. There's no telling what might happen. Estelle says, yeah, I know what you mean. I'm still having a hard time wrapping my head around the idea of something like this happening in Libelle, though. It feels like the start of something really big. Joshua says, my thoughts exactly. Sky Pirates and those men in black that were manipulating the Mayor of Rouen behind the scenes. If we can learn more about them, we might be able to get a solid lead. Not to mention why Dad disappeared like that. Estelle nods, yeah. Well, while we're saving the Professor, we can look around for clues. Tita says, oof, okay, this ought to do it. The metal part of the slot connectors got loose. Agate asks, anyone ever tell you you're a busybody? If I wanted mods that simple, I could do them myself. But hey, thanks. Tita laughs, you're welcome. Oh, by the way, how are you feeling? I hope you don't feel all yucky. Agate says, yeah, I'm fine. You really don't have to worry. If you really want to worry about someone, worry about yourself. Now's the time to back out, if you still want to. Tita says, Agate says, don't get me wrong, I ain't telling you not to come. It's just, aren't you scared? Tita asks, huh? Agate says, even though we're doing this for the old man, we're still breaking into a military base. Most kids would piss themselves at the idea of doing something this major. So how come you're all carefree about it? Tita blushes. Well, I'm really scared out of my mind. But I have Joshua and Estelle with me. And you're here too. Not being alone makes it easier, so I don't have to think about how scared I am. She laughs. Maybe that's a little stupid. Joshua, Agate laughs a little, try incredibly. Anyway, worrying is just a waste of time. Tita laughs. Sorry. Can I ask you something? Agate asks, where'd this come from? Tita says, I was just wondering, who's Misha? Agate asks, how do you know that name? Tita says, you called me that when you were poisoned. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said anything. Agate says, no, it's nothing I'm ashamed of. Misha's my kid sister. Tita says, oh wow, you're a big brother. How old is she? Older than me. Agate says, well, sort of. I guess she'd be around your age. Tita says, I guess you haven't seen her in a long time? Agate says, work keeps me busy. I only go home about once a year. Tita says, oh, poor Misha. Agate asks, what's that supposed to mean? Tita says, I just think that if I had a big brother, I'd want to be with him all the time. I bet she feels the same way. Agate asks, really? Well, you might be right. If I was more reliable, maybe I'd be with her. Tita asks, so? A crew member's voice says, we'll be landing at Lyston Fortress soon. All braces to the cargo hold. Agate says, looks like it's time. Estelle says, oh, here you are. Tita says, hi, Estelle. Estelle asks, didn't you hear the announcement? Joshua says, we'll be arriving soon. Agate says, yeah, I'm all done getting ready. Estelle asks, did you get everything you need, sweetie? Tita says, yep, you betcha. I even tested the timing. I think I should be able to handle the biosensor, so leave that to me. Estelle says, well now, that's encouraging. Joshua says, we're counting on you, Tita. Tita nods. Right. Agate asks, why don't we head down to the cargo hold? Why not, indeed? Maintenance Chief Gustav says, good, you're here. Estelle says, looks like you've got everything set up. Maintenance Chief Gustav says, I'm all done with disguising the container. If you just open it up, all you'll see are these plates that are used for fixing ship holds. But there's another door on this side, and you can't tell it's there when it's closed. Estelle says, hey, that's pretty cool. Joshua says, this ought to fool the biosensor and allow us to sneak in. Maintenance Chief Gustav says, so all that's left is for you to pile in. Are you folks ready for this? Estelle says, of course we are. Agate says, I was born ready. Maintenance Chief Gustav says, okay, then you'll need to get in one at a time. Once you're all inside, I'll close the hidden door. Joshua says, understood. I'll go first. And so everyone gets in. Estelle says, man, this is cramped. If you don't get in exactly right. Joshua asks, Estelle, are you okay? Estelle says, I'm fine. Estelle says, there we go. Joshua says, turn your head this way. Estelle says, okay. Oh, Joshua? I don't know about holding this pose. Joshua says, we've just got to deal with it. Otherwise we'll never get all four of us in here. Estelle says, right. Yeah, we have to do this. Joshua says, ahem. Next up is Tita. Agate, you're in the back. We should all fit in if we do it that way. Tita says, okay, in I go. Tita says, sorry, Estelle. Estelle says, oh, Tita, you're all warm and snuggly. And you even smell kind of sweet, like fresh milk. Tita says, hey, don't hug so tight. I kinda can't breathe. Estelle laughs. It's not that bad, is it? My, what squishable cheeks you have. Tita goes, eee. Joshua sighs. Estelle, quit playing around. Agate says, okay, now I'm getting nervous. Hey kids, make a little room. Tita says, oof. Agate says, there, is it too cramped? Tita says, no, I'm okay. I can hold out. Agate says, don't be stubborn. If it's too uncomfortable, just say so. Tita says, okay. Agate says, okay man, I think we're set. Maintenance Chief Gustav says, gotcha, I'll close the door. Perhaps tell us how to open it from the inside? Maintenance Chief Gustav says, I'll make sure we unload this container ASAP after we land. And from there, it's all on you. Just be patient and stay calm. Good luck, kids. And we have arrived at Leiston Fortress. Maintenance Chief Gustav says, Major Sid, I'm here as per your request. Major Sid says, hello Chief Gustav, I'm sorry to make you come all this way. That said, however, I'm impressed. I wasn't expecting you to get here so soon. Maintenance Chief Gustav says, the Royal Military is one of my best customers. You folks are always a priority. Not to mention, the order sounded pretty urgent. I already finished maintenance on the patrol ship. Did something happen? Major Sid says, oh, nothing significant, just your usual military requirements. Oh yes, I've heard about the attack on the Central Labs. I've recently come into possession of a clue which may help us wrap up this matter within as little as a few days. Maintenance Chief Gustav says, oh, that's excellent news. Professor Russell is one of my greatest inspirations and benefactors. I hope he hasn't been injured. Major Sid says, no, you can relax on that score. Maintenance Chief Gustav says, oh, how can you be so sure? Major Sid says, it seems that the abductors are demanding a ransom for the Professor's safe return. That would suggest that he's unharmed, so I don't think that's a concern. Maintenance Chief Gustav says, I see. Well, it looks like the Royal Armed Forces have this well under control. So are you planning to do another container check today? Major Sid says, I trust you, but regulations must be adhered to. All right, grunts, get to work. You actually call them grunts, okay. Soldier 1 says, roger that, sir. Soldier 2 says, roger. Soldier 1 says, nothing unusual here. Next one. Soldier 2 says, this one's clear. And they go around checking each one of the containers. Soldier 1 says, I'm picking up an anomaly on the sensors. Looks like it's alive, whatever it is. Major Sid asks, what? What is this, Maintenance Chief? Maintenance Chief Gustav says, hey now, I have no idea. You sure your equipment's in working order? Major Sid says, of course it is. It's a Central Lab-made biosensor. Maintenance Chief Gustav says, well, if you say so, it's probably just a mouse or some such. Hardly worth making such a fuss over, is it? Major Sid says, regulations are regulations. Surround that container, men. Major Sid says, all right, open it up. Major Sid says, huh? It's the Nyan cat. Maintenance Chief Gustav says, oh, it's just Antoine. When did you sneak off, huh? Antoine says, several things in cat. Major Sid asks, okay, so what's with the cat? Maintenance Chief Gustav says, his name's Antoine. He lives at the Central Labs. I'd guess he sneaked onto the Leab. Major Sid says, he certainly gave me quite a shock. False alarm, I guess. Antoine says, more curses and cat. Major Sid says, well, I suppose that one can't blame a cat for being a cat. Hey you, if you like it here, you're welcome to stay for a while. Maintenance Chief Gustav says, hey now, don't try to tempt him. Antoine summons the Legions of Doom upon Major Sid and runs off onto the ship again. Major Sid says, I think I'm getting the cold shoulder. Maintenance Chief Gustav laughs. Too bad. Still, that biosensor's a pretty impressive piece of work. If not for it, Antoine would have been packed away in storage. Major Sid says, well, it is of Central Lab make. Alright men, check the other containers. Soldier 3 says, yes sir. Major Sid says, I appreciate your efforts. We'll bring the containers in tomorrow, so you can return to the barracks for now. Soldier 1 asks, pardon me, Major, but how long is the current emergency command structure expected to last? Soldier 2 says, that's right. We're Army, sir. Why do we have to associate with them? Major Sid says, it's not that I don't understand what you're getting at, but it is not the place of a soldier to question the orders of a superior officer. Besides, you never know who's watching or listening. Discretion is a must at all times. Soldier 1 says, yes, sir. Soldier 2 says, understood, sir. And the soldiers march away. Major Sid sighs, I feel guilty. National Guard officer says, Major, I have intel to report. Captain Amalthea has come and wishes to speak with you, sir. Major Sid says, I see, very well. I suppose I'll have to see what the little vixen has to say. I see. Estelle sighs. Phew, I can't feel my legs anymore. You okay, Tita? Tita says, yeah, just a little fuzzy in the head is all. But I'm glad we got the equipment to work. Agate says, yeah, nice job. It was a tight situation, literally, but you stepped up. Tita laughs. Thank you, Agate. But Antoine showing up like that really spooked me. Estelle says, yeah, he was right in the next container over. I thought we'd be discovered for sure. Joshua says, I think the chief put him in there on purpose. That false alarm got the soldiers to relax. He kept a cool head, though. Tita laughs. That does sound like something the chief would do. Agate says, definitely a man not to mess with. Now, we ought to get moving. We're somewhere close to the airship port. We need a plan or else we'll never find the professor. So Estelle, check the map and tell me which way we should go. Estelle says, huh? Why are you asking me? Agate says, call it a test of how observant you are. Time's short, so let's have your answer. Obviously we go for the research wing. Agate says, well, colour me surprised. Estelle says, just leave it to me. Agate says, great job, kid, but don't get cocky. What's your take, Joshua? Joshua says, I agree with her. Since it's a standalone facility, it's probably the best place to make use of the professor's talents. Agate says, I think you're right. We don't have much time, so let's go check it out. Joshua asks, Agate, do we have an exit strategy? Agate says, oh right, the lake on the other side of the airship port has a wharf. Once we get the old man, we can steal a boat from there. Estelle says, okay, got it. Alright, let's go check out the research area. You stay close, Tita. Tita nods. Okay. Okay, off we go then. Yes, let's miss because we can. Yay! She hit.
All right, we're good to go.
Those attack delays are not welcome.
Should have done that.
Not welcome at all. Yeah, I'm gonna have to tear Joshua. You've got a bazooka. You're standing so close that you can't miss, and you still miss. That's beautiful.
Should have done that.
Not at the broadside of a barn.
Care for a rematch?
Nice.
We did it!
The door is firmly shut. That seems bad for us.
Prepare to hit your doom! Come on, everyone! Scary.
We're finished. All right, we're good to go.
Nice. What is it with no one hitting today?
We did it!
That's that then. Let's move out.
Bill says, "Oh." Joshua says, "I know them." Agate says, "Huh, so they are here." Tita says, "The airship from the tower." Estelle says, "I thought they must be military. They look nothing like the regular soldiers, though." Joshua says, "They're probably a special force here to practice covert ops. No wonder they're so tough." Tita asks, "So is my grandpa in there?" Agate says, "It's looking more and more likely. But if we try to take them on here, we're going to have a rough time of it." Joshua says, "You're right. If we cause a disturbance, we'll get swarmed by the soldiers inside." Estelle asks, "Isn't there some way we can get inside without getting spotted?" Well, let's see if we can find one, shall we? Well, this looks like a window. Estelle asks, "Hey, can't we get in from here?" Joshua says, "No, there are iron bars over the windows. If we make any noise, this is going to get even tougher." Tita says, "Oh." Agate says, "Jackpot." Estelle asks, "Huh?" Colonel Richard says, "I really can't thank you enough, Professor Russell. Your work on finding a means to controlling this gospel is of great help. On behalf of the Intelligence Division, I extend my deepest gratitude." Professor Russell says, "I should have known that you were behind all of this. Colonel Richard, Chief of Intelligence. Hard to believe you once served under Cassius." Colonel Richard says, "Ah yes, you and he were friends, if my memory serves me correctly. We've been looking for him, actually, though we've yet to pin down his exact location. If you have some idea of where to base a search, we'd be happy to have that information." Professor Russell says, "I don't know, not that I'd tell you if I did." Colonel Richard laughs. "Well, no matter. If perchance the gospel were to have been delivered into his hands, then I'm afraid it would have presented a problem. However, even if he were to show his face now, he would have no means of stopping this current." Professor Russell says, "The Black Ointment, or the Gospel as you call it. I just want to know what you plan to do with it." Scratch that. First and foremost, I want to know where you even acquired something that bizarre. Colonel Richard says, "I imagine my source would rather their identity be kept a secret. Our intentions, well, they'll become evident very soon. At that time, Professor, we'll be happy to release you. All I ask is that you wait." Professor Russell says, "And you're just going to let a witness to your crimes go free? I assume then that you intend to do something on a grand scale." Colonel Richard laughs. "I'll leave the particulars up to your fertile imagination. That said, come the dawn when everything is realized, you will assist in our research. This invention will bring liberal riches like none ever before seen." Professor Russell says, "Not interested." Captain Amalthea says, "Please, Professor, allow him to finish before you give your answer. It would truly be a pity if she were to come into some peril, and you were unable to help her." Professor Russell says, You'd threaten her to get to me?" Colonel Richard says, "Tut tut, Captain Amalthea. It looks like your renowned powers of persuasion were not as elegant as they once were." Captain Amalthea laughs. "Pardon me, then." Colonel Richard says, "One might say that she has a unique sense of humour. I don't want any misunderstandings between us, but you must understand that we are only soldiers. You have my word that no civilians will be involved, save for you, of course." Professor Russell asks, "Are you doing this out of some twisted sense of patriotism? Then this black orbment that can shut down all power. I see, so that's your plan, is it?" Colonel Richard says, Second Lieutenant Lawrence says, "Pardon me." Captain Althea says, "Hello, Lieutenant. The Colonel is presently in a meeting. He wants no interruptions." Colonel Richard says, "No, it's all right. Give me your report, Lieutenant." Second Lieutenant Lawrence says, "There's been activity in Gransel. The White Wings were caught in the net just as you planned." Captain Althea says, "My goodness." Colonel Richard laughs. "Check and mate." Colonel Richard says, "Now, Professor, if you please excuse me." He takes the black orbment, tucks it into his pocket, and says, "Major Sid, see to the Professor and make sure that he's comfortable." Major Sid says, "Yes, sir." Major Sid asks, "Is there anything you need, Professor?" "I'll get you set up with any of the standard amenities." Professor Russell harumphs, "I'm fine. I used to believe that you were different from the others, that you were a good, upstanding man. Apparently I greatly overestimated you." Major Sid says, "My apologies. But you've been abducted by rebels, you see. Rebels against the Queen. Nameless, unknown rebels. Stress that fact, and I might even let you write a letter to your granddaughter." Professor Russell shouts, "Get out of my sight!" Major Sid says, "As you wish," and leaves. Estelle says, "So Colonel Richard was the man behind all this trouble. Plus, it looks like he wants to find my dad." Joshua says, "Yeah, I wonder what that's all about. And who was that masked man?" Agathe says, "Of course that bastard would show up now." And there he goes. Second Lieutenant Lawrence says, "Grand plans, but what will come of them?" Agathe says, "Now things have gotten interesting. I really wanted to settle the score with him, but I've got a job to do, and that takes precedence." Estelle says, "Since the window's a no-go, I'll have to take out the guards. Let's make this quick and clean." Tita nods. "Right." Estelle asks, "Joshua? Hey, you listening?" Joshua asks, "Estelle?" Tita asks, "Are you okay?" Agathe says, "Hey, snap out of it. It's not like you to freeze up." Joshua says, "Sorry, I just spaced out." Estelle asks, "Are you sure you're feeling okay?" Joshua says, "I'm fine. It's no big deal. We have to take out the guards by the entrance, right?" Agathe nods. "Yep, so let's get a move on." Black-clad man 1 says, "I really wanted to be part of the Gransel operation." "No, I'm left here, guarding an old man." Black-clad man 2 grumbles. "We do so much for the kingdom and for our dream, all in the Colonel's name. Such is the life of the Intelligence Division's Special Ops, I suppose, for the Colonel's hands and eyes." Agathe says, "If you ask me, you're the Colonel's arse." Special Ops Soldier 1 says, "What? It can't be." Special Ops Soldier 2 says, "Agathe cross no." Agathe says, "You're too damn slow." And we charge into battle. Ow. Ow! That was unnecessary.
Sorry.
That was exceptionally unnecessary. Tear of balm on myself. Should have used that last time. Okay, I'll revive Estelle.
Oh, okay.
As I can. Yeah, Agate is not going to be able to get over to them, so he can heal up Estelle. Tira for Joshua, and we'll use Vital Cannon.
Go for it.
Attack him.
Damn it.
Oh, come on.
That's that then. Let's move out.
All that damage they do for a maximum of 8 EXP. Anyway, Agate says, sucks to be you. It's no fun when someone gets back at you for making a fool of him, huh? Estelle says, it's not good to carry a grudge, you know. Joshua says, no, it's a race against time. We have to get the professor out as quickly as possible. Tita says, right. Professor Russell says, so, you're back. Enough, I told you. I don't want any... Tita says, Grandpa. Professor Russell asks, Tita, I must be dreaming. Tita cries, Grandpa! Then starts crying, thank goodness you're okay. Cries some more. Really cries. Professor Russell asks, this isn't a dream? And you lot? Estelle says, hey Professor, you don't look like you are feeling so hot. Joshua says the factory chief Murdoch asked us to come and get you out of here. Professor Russell says, I'm impressed. You actually sneaked in here? So much like your father, not a lick of common sense between the two of you. Agate says, hey old man, sorry to interrupt your little vacation, but we need to get you ready for a jailbreak. We don't have a lot of time. Professor Russell asks, who are you? You look like you came from the wrong side of the barn. I can tell that at least. You have a head like a chicken. Agate stammers, say that again, you geezer! Estelle laughs. Nice one, Professor. Tita says, Grandpa, you shouldn't say mean things like that. This is Agate. He's a senior bracer over Estelle and Joshua. Professor Russell says, well now, I had no idea. Come to think of it, I think I've heard Cassius mention your name before. Something about a bad seed who was always sulking about one thing or another, I believe. Agate grumbles, I'm about this far from wringing your neck, old man. Joshua says, now, calm down. Professor, we'll have to save the explanations for later. And now we need to get you out of here. Is there anything you want to bring with you? Professor Russell says, can we carry the Capel unit? If we leave it behind, I know that these fools will just misuse it again. Joshua says, understood. We have obtained the Orbital calculator. Professor Russell says, I've been using that in my research to find a means of controlling the black augment. I wasn't able to discern its physical composition, but I did have some success with the control method, which means that these fools will be able to cause that phenomenon to reoccur whenever they want. Estelle says, oh. Professor Russell says, I'm sorry, Estelle and Joshua. I hate that it's being so grievously misused after you went to all the trouble of bringing it to me. Joshua says, believe me, we understand. With Cheetah's safety on the line, I can't imagine any of us would have done any differently. Estelle says, besides, it's our fault that you two got caught up in this to begin with. Agate says, for the love of Aidos, we don't have time for you to give speeches. If you're all set, then we have to go. Get your asses in gear. Move as fast as the old man's slipped disc will let you. Professor Russell says, oh, very clever. I haven't let any young man beat me yet, and I'm not about to start now. Tita says, come on, both of you. Well, indeed, is there anything that we can nick from out of here? Not by the looks of it. Special Ops Soldier 2 groans. You think we'll just let you escape? Well, we hoped so. Teacher asked, what's that? Professor Russell says, guess the jig is up. Major Sid says, it appears we have an intruder. Get out there and start searching then. Platoons 1 through 4 will go to the airship port and the docks and establish a blockade. 5, 6 and 7 will search the barracks, watchtower and research facilities respectively. Platoon 8 will accompany me to headquarters. That is all. Move out. Soldiers shout, yes sir. Estelle shouts, crap, here come the soldiers. Joshua says, looks like they're putting the squeeze on the airship port and the docks. The Major knows what he's doing. Professor Russell laughs. What else would you expect from the CEO of a fort defense regiment? Tita asks, what should we do? Where do we go? Ite says, well, leaving by the docks is going to be tricky. We need to avoid the guards and find another way out. Royal Army Soldier. 798 HP, no particular elemental weakness, doesn't drop anything, member of the Leicester Fortress Garrison. They're selected for their skill in battle. And the Royal Army Officer, 1000 HP, no particular elemental weakness, doesn't drop anything. An NCO of the Leicester Fortress Garrison, a seasoned warrior not to be taken lightly. Indeed. Draw the bayonets!
Here for a rematch.
Estelle says, damn it, we're in trouble. Joshua says, that last one seems to have alerted the other soldiers. Agate says, let's withdraw to the research area for now. Tita's out of breath. Are those soldiers going to be alright? Agate says, oh, don't sweat it, they're just unconscious. Anyway, the less fighting we have to deal with, the better. Joshua says, we'll have to avoid the soldiers while we look for another way out. Command Center. Let's rattle a few cages, shall we? This door is locked. This door is locked. This door is locked. That door is locked. That door is locked. That door is locked. All the doors are locked. Lucky us. All the doors is locked. Why would you lock all these? Why would you lock all the doors in a fortress? Well, just a few political prisoners then. Josette says, hey, don't you think it's awfully noisy outside? Kyle says, sounds to me like someone's breaking in. Don says, say what? Who's breaking in? Nobody's allowed to break in until we break out. Nobody. Kyle says, easy bro, you know your simple little escape plan won't ever. Joshua says, this looks like the dungeon. Estelle says, wow, it's a lot bigger than the dungeon at the Harkin Gate. Estelle says, huh? Josette says, what? Estelle says, You? Kyle says, you guys are... Don says, you're those punks from before. Joshua says, well then, long time no see. Estelle says, oh, okay, you guys are being held here. How have you been? Josette says, hey, we don't need your damn pity. The only thing you're good for is handling a pole, air for brains. Estelle says, geez, I was just trying to be polite. If it'll make you feel better, insult me all you want. Josette says, What? Don't try to play it cool. Agate says, I'm assuming you know these folks. Joshua says, the Capua Sky Bandits. They hijacked that airliner. Professor Russell says, I've heard stories about them. They use a very high-powered airship, don't they? I've heard it's of Imperial make, but I'm curious about the specs. Kyle says, yeah, it's got a top speed of 2,300 yards per hour. Why should I have to answer your questions? Professor Russell says, my, aren't we petty? Tita says, Grandpa, I don't think this is the right time for asking about that kind of stuff. Don says, now wait just one damn minute. Why are you braces here in the first place? Are you the cause of that siren? Estelle frowns. Joshua thinks inwardly. Professor Russell says, Tita says, why do we? Agate says, well, sorry we intruded. Josette says, no fair. Kyle says, you're the intruders, right? Don says, hey, let us out of here. Estelle sighs, that was a surprise. Come to think of it, those guys have some connection to the men in black, right? But they got arrested by Colonel Richard, which means... Joshua says, maybe the Colonel's trumping it up as one of his accomplishments, and maybe Mayor Dalmore was used in a similar fashion. Agate says, and yet somehow I just can't seem to muster up any sympathy for him. We're wasting time here, we've got to find another escape route. A soldier's voice says, hey, did you find them? Second soldier's voice says, no, and I've searched the barracks top to bottom. Another soldier says, same goes for the watchtower. All that leaves is headquarters. While we're there, we can report to the Major that we've gone over the place with a fine-tooth comb. Estelle says, uh-oh, I think they're coming this way. Agate says, shit, and this is a blind valley too. A man's voice shouts, come on, this way. Estelle asks, hey, did you hear something? Tita says, yeah, I think it said this way. A man's voice says, there's no time, you don't want to be caught, do you? Professor Russell says, I don't think I misheard that. Agate says, we don't have a choice, we might as well give it a shot. The man's voice continues, come on, just down the corridor. Estelle says, hey Joshua, do you recognize that voice? Joshua says, yes, it sounds familiar. The man's voice says, quickly, get inside. Agate says, hey now, this room is... Professor Russell says, well, I don't know what he's intending, but we don't have any other choice but to keep going. Major Sid says, that was spectacularly close. Estelle says, I knew it. Major Sid says, lock it, just to be on the safe side. Joshua says, got it. And he locks the door. Professor Russell asks, what are you planning? You're the CEO of Leiston Fortress. Didn't Colonel Richard order you to keep me locked up? Major Sid says, I'm very sorry about that. He's already seized control of the Royal Armed Forces by using his position in the Intelligence Division, and the main generals were given the choice of obeying him or being imprisoned. General Morgan refused to obey him, and as such is currently imprisoned at the Harken Gate. Estelle asks, that stubborn old man? Joshua says, this is getting serious. Agate says, what the hell? I figured things were bad, but not that bad. When did the military structure get that fragile? Major Sid says, unfortunately, observance of military regs has been breaking down ever since the end of the war. particularly since the top brass haven't stopped embezzling and accepting bribes. Colonel Richard just took advantage of the situation. Professor Russell says, I see, so he was able to make use of the military's existing corruption and weakness to seize control. Major Sid says, precisely. With General Morgan in custody, that leaves Colonel Richard as the man in charge of the entire Royal Armed Forces. Estelle says, that's horrible. Agathe asks, what about Queen Alicia? Doesn't Supreme Command of the Army rest with the Queen? Major Sid says, mysteriously enough, Queen Alicia has kept silent on the matter. The Royal Guardsmen are actually being sought for questioning on suspicion of treason. Estelle says, treason? Lieutenant Schwartz too? Major Sid says, the attack on the central factory has been pinned on the Royal Guardsmen. There's even photographic evidence, as I understand it. Joshua says, Dorothy's pictures. Tita says, that just doesn't sound right. The factory was all messed up and Grandpa was kidnapped. Agathe was almost killed. You can't just go around blaming people for something like that. Major Sid says, I really don't know what to tell you. You never disobey direct order from a superior officer. But since I never voiced my objections, the fault still lies with me. I know this will not make up for all I have done, but I was hoping it would go some way to atoning for my actions. Agathe says, you've had a tough time of it, ain't you? Professor Russell says, well, if all that you've said is true, then I suppose I can forgive and forget. I had been prepared to brain you with a wrench and soften up that hard head. Pity. Major Sid says, I'm sorry. Tita says, Grandpa. Professor Russell says, it was a joke, dear. Estelle says, okay, I've got everything, but what are you planning to do now? Are you planning on hiding us until the heat dies down? Major Sid says, no, I have a much better solution. There's a way for you to escape the fortress through this room. Estelle asks, through this room? How? Joshua says, I get it. There's a secret passageway or something, right? Major Sid laughs. Very astute, boy. Estelle says, whoa. Agathe says, makes sense for a military control room. Not bad at all. Major Sid says, this emergency escape hatch leads to an underground aqueduct. There's a boat set up there, so you should be able to use it and escape. Legally, even my telling civilians about it would net me 10 years in prison. But even if military regulations won't forgive me, I think Aida's probably will. Tita says, Major. Agathe says, all right, we'll use it. I'll go down first, then the old man and Tita. Estelle and Joshua, I want you to watch our backs. Estelle says, got it. Joshua says, roger that. Professor Russell says, farewell, Major. Tita says, well, thank you very much. Estelle says, well then, that just leaves us. Thank you for everything, Major. Joshua says, we're in your debt. Major Sid says, you don't need to thank me. To be honest, I was expecting this since the moment I first saw you. Estelle asks, what? Joshua asks, you mean when we met at the front gate? Major Sid said, yes, as soon as I heard your last name. After all, you're the children of Colonel Cassius, are you not? Estelle says, Colonel Cassius? You mean my dad really had a rank that high? Major Sid says, Richard may be a colonel now, but he served under your father back in those days. Your dad was a real hero. It was thanks to his efforts that we were able to defeat Erebonia in the war 10 years ago. Being as you're his children, I'm not surprised that you found out the truth and came to help the professor. Estelle says, really? But he never said anything about being any kind of military hero. A soldier's voice calls, are you okay, Major? The intruders have been spotted in the dungeon. The last likely place for them to be is in Central HQ, sir. Your orders? Estelle says, crap. Major Sid calls, acknowledged. I will be right there, so put the facility on high alert. Major Sid then says, come on, you need to go. Estelle says, okay. Joshua says, excuse us then. And they all jump down the hole. Estelle says, that scared the living daylights out of me. What's the deal with the slide? Joshua says, looks like some kind of secret waterway. Come on, let's catch up. Well, catching up we go. Professor Russell says, you're here. Tita says, this way. Agate says, you're late. What took you so long? Estelle says, sorry, we just got into a conversation about my dad. Joshua says, sorry for the hold-up. You can go ahead and take off. Professor Russell says, all right, hold on to your hats. Estelle says, phew, we managed to make it out. Looks like they haven't started patrolling over here yet. Joshua says, Major Sid may be keeping them busy, but if we waste any time here, we're probably going to have to deal with a pursuit force. We've got to get the professor somewhere safe or else. Professor Russell says, Tita asks, Estelle, Joshua. Estelle says, oh, it's okay, no need to worry. I promise we'll be here to protect both of you. Agate says, no, you two fall back. Estelle asks, huh? Joshua asks, what do you mean? Agate says, the intelligence division knows my face all too well by now. Same goes for Tita and the old man. But they've got no idea you two are involved, unless old Sid blabs. So I'm getting out of here and taking them with me. We'll lay low for a while somewhere safe. Tita says, Agate. Professor Russell says, I understand. The fewer people implicated in this, the better. In fact, I never wanted Tita to get wrapped up in this in the first place. When I think about them taking hostages to force cooperation, it makes the most sense for us both to get out of here. Tita says, Grandpa. Estelle says, whoa, wait just a damn minute. How can you ask us to turn our backs on you just to keep ourselves safe? That's totally bonkers. We could never agree to that. Right, Joshua? Joshua says, actually, I agree with Agate's assessment. Estelle says, what? Joshua says, according to the theory of retreat and cover, the more people there are together, the greater the chance of detection. Which means that Agate will stand a better chance of helping them get away on his own. I understand how you must feel, but for now, we really need to do what Agate says. Estelle says, but... Agate says, nice one, Joshua, exactly what I was getting at. Now, I need you to be a good girl and withdraw. Estelle says, wait, I get your idea in theory. Tita says, Estelle... Professor Russell says, you don't agree, and I can see it written all over your face. So, how about I send you on an important mission instead? Something I certainly can't do myself, given the circumstances. Estelle asks her. Professor Russell says, first, I want you to go to Gransel. Then you must speak with Her Majesty Queen Alicia in Gransel Castle. Estelle cries, I must what? Joshua asks, what's this all about? Professor Russell says, the aforementioned black ornament, it originally somehow fell into Colonel Richard's hands. He referred to it as the Gospel. Joshua asks, Gospel as in religious teachings? Agate says, that's certainly an ominous sounding name. Professor Russell says, apparently this gospel was taken from the intelligence division, but by whom I couldn't say. After that, I'd wager that it was probably sent out in a package addressed to Cassius. However, intelligence caught wind of our little a blackout from before. They must have realized that the Black Augment was involved and here in Zeiss. I suspect that was their true objective in attacking the factory. They came to retrieve this gospel. Estelle asks, really? Joshua says, I see. That explains a lot. Professor Russell says, Colonel Richard has some kind of plan to use it in the capital. Unless I miss my guess, something very bad is coming. Her Majesty must be informed of this at once. Estelle asks, you mean the shutdown of all power? Professor Russell says, no, perhaps if it's used. I'm sorry, anything more I say would be pure conjecture. Regardless, the Queen must be made aware of this gospel as soon as possible. I'm more concerned with that than my own escape. Estelle sighs. I swear. When you put it like that, I feel like a jerk for wanting to say no. Joshua says, if you'll allow us, we'll accept your request. Professor Russell says, I appreciate it. Tita says, Estelle, Joshua. Joshua says, we've got to part ways for a little bit, Tita. Estelle says, I'm sorry, I'd hoped that we could stay together. Tita says, no, you don't have to apologize. You've just helped me so much, and you've treated me like a little sister. Estelle says, Tita. Tita says, thanks for helping my grandpa. And thank you for being my friend. I love you both. Estelle says, I love you too, sweetie. Joshua says, I wish we could take you with us. Thank you so much. Agate says, parting is such sweet sorrow and all that, but we have no choice. Maybe you can save the tears for when you see each other again, you know? Estelle sniffles, you can be a real jerk. But I guess this is where we part ways too. A lot's happened, but you taught us so much by letting us work with you. Thank you, Master Agate. Agate says, don't call me that. It creeps me out. Estelle laughs. Look who's embarrassed. Agate says, you really are your father's daughter. Hey, Joshua, don't let her get too out of control, you hear me? She's not half bad in combat, but there's more to being an adult than just that. Estelle frowns. Not that it's any of your business. Joshua says, just leave her to me. You can take care as well. Take care of Tita and the professor. Agate says, I will. All right then, let's get a move on. Professor Russell says, farewell, children of Cassius. Tita says, stay safe, both of you. Estelle says, you too, Tita. Joshua says, Aidos be with you. Be careful out there. And off the three of them go. And that is the end of Chapter 3. So that will be the end of this episode. If you've made it this far, thank you very much for watching. We hope you have a wonderful day, and we will see you in the next episode.